Welcome, dear friends, to Kardec Radio here live with you to talk about the programs What is Spiritism? What is Spiritism? Is Kardec's book. Yes, it's a book. As a wonderful researcher and educator, he compiled this book 2 years after publishing the Spirit book. And he wanted people to talk about it, to address their questions, to understand the main principles, the dynamics, and the consequences in our lives. It's phenomenal. Think about it. How many people over the centuries, serious, committed thinkers and scholars have researched on mediumistic phenomena, on spirit phenomena? Many, including William James, the renowned Harvard professor. And what happened? We had a book here, a report there, but they all missed something that only Kardec, he went over the rainbow, to the other side of the rainbow, and got the golden pot. What is it? The moral consequences. Okay, if you and I are immortal beings, if we keep on living in spite of the death of the physical body, if we keep thinking and feeling and communicating, progressing, then what does it mean for us? It means a lot of things, but mainly that our lives are beyond imagination. It's not only about this moment, it's about immortality. It changes our living paradigm, and thus living differently, as he foreseen in its fifth phase. Spiritism would have a great social impact, transforming not only people but societies, nations, organizations, and thus boosting, fostering a new earth. Isn't that what we need? We do. And here we are to talk about a specific section today, chapter 2, when Kardec is talking about somebody who doesn't know about Spiritism. Let's call this person the skeptic, as he did. The specific part today has a lot of meaning for us because it talks about mental illness, suicide, and obsession. Can it cause, in any way, means, can it be caused by Spiritism? And also, if we don't know who we were in the past, how can it be good for us in this life? All of these questions and many more will be addressed today by Kardec, and we have friends who have been committed to studying Spiritism who are here with us. I'm going to introduce you to friends who you already know and seen before, not only at this program, but in other programs. Carol is with us. Hello, Carol. How are you?
Hello, Vanessa. I am wonderful and delighted to be here. Thank you.
It's good to be with you, Carol. And I know you've hosted this program before, but and you've been with me before in the kickstarting of the program. Can you tell me, just everybody who is here with us, and if they are watching this, they can ask their questions right now or make comments right now. So, Carol, this
Absolutely.
book, what does it represent for us?
It represents an opportunity for us to continue shifting our living paradigm, as you have said, because Kardec explains the principles of Spiritism brilliantly. That's one. Secondly, Kardec foresees that Spiritism will reach the minds and hearts of those who come from other beliefs, and he brilliantly, masterfully trains us in learning how to speak with our brothers and sisters in a very respectful and lucid way, using a loving firmness that is unique to his genius mind, absolutely inspired by Master Jesus, the governor of the earth. So, this book is, as you have said, life changing for us. And I'm sure you would agree, Vanessa, we can read the same passage 10 times and we will still be mesmerized by Kardec's insights,
It
right?
is so true. I think it's phenomenal when you say that, because people who are watching us may say, "But I read this book before."
Mhm.
But we're studying together, and the revisiting of the excerpts plus the exchange of ideas boosted by critical thinking changes everything, right?
It does.
And
And we
we
are
have
delighted
another
to do
friend.
it together.
Together is better. So let's bring our other friend, Solomon Waters from London. How are you, Solomon?
Hi, Vanessa. Hi, Caroline. Good, thank you.
It's so good to have you again here with us. We had a blast last week, right, Carol?
That's
Yes, it was wonderful to see you, Saul, as
Yes.
part of the audience. Thank you.
yeah.
Yes. And Saul, when I know you've been studying this book and other Kardec's books, but particularly this one, overall, what would you say is the most interesting part of this book so far?
I think it adds sort of details that aren't in the other books, and it kind of says things in a different way. So like one of our topics about suicide, there's other slants that haven't been covered before, and I think it's the nuances and the details that come out. So there's like Carol was saying, there's always a little bit more to learn, and he is certainly very incisive. He was clearly a scholar, and it shows, because even if some people will say, well, this book doesn't cover a lot of new ground, but the different angles are very interesting, and there are different things covered than in the other books. So it all adds to the education of the spiritist, and for any reader.
Yes, it's interesting that Kardec is having a conversation. And when I read this, often I have that feeling that we are in front of somebody who is available, number one, who is open to anyone's questions, and he's willing, deeply willing to clarify doubts and to encourage people to the new mindset of living. So, as we enter the conversation, this visitor who doesn't know much about Spiritism or at all, and is skeptic, uh, addresses Kardec with an affirmation. He says, certain people regard Spiritist ideas as likely to disturb the mental faculties, and for that reason, they think it prudent to stop its expansion. When I read this, I said, you know, at that time, they didn't have the science that we do nowadays. But we already have a few scientific papers that already address the mental sanity of Spiritist mediums. One of them was done in Brazil by Dr. Alexander Moreira, a psychiatrist researcher who covered in a whole scientific paper quite the opposite. And Kardec is going to mention this. And he mentions that way before science proves it, which shows that his rational mind was quite in place to deduce that that was going to happen, and based on his own experience too, because he did the experiments without the imaging of the brain. But we know today that the Spiritist practice of mediumship actually brings great boost to mental health, and people who practice it may even be more stable emotionally and spiritually than other people. And then Dr. Ina Newberg, with Dr. Julio Perez and others, published a paper on the imaging of the brain showing how the brain of some certain types of mediums may activate differently during certain mediumistic spirit phenomena, and yet emotionally they're stable, they are ordinary people like all of us. So when you visited Brazil, the country that has the greatest expansion of spiritism so far, you got to know many mediums, right?
Right.
And was your impression that you were in a psychiatric ward because you were around mediums, spiritist mediums?
No, I think it's like an energy, really. You know, the energy is very solid, very caring. So I think if we look at the structure of, say, mental health or just being well, it is often solid, reliable, stable, and kind. So I think what Spiritism brings is that loving kindness, and it is something that's very strong because you actually, it's so strong as from a Western point of view, coming to Brazil, where this is every town has, you know, a spiritist center or mediumship of some description. So for me, it was very unusual, and I think I said this in the last talk we had, that when I went there, there was not a single person who said I can't feel it. It was like stepping into an oven where the energy that people would use to pray and to help each other was very tangible, especially with experienced mediums. So for me, it was like a physical thing. It was a tangible, real thing, straight from the get-go. And I was interviewing people to, to record my experiences, and really everybody said the same thing, no matter what background they came from, whether they were just an average Joe or didn't believe in God or anything. They all said, "Yes, I feel it. I come in here and I feel it." So, and it was the same, in all the places I went to in Brazil, and equally in England with all the mediums, that I meet, and doing mediumship, practical mediumship online and face to face. The same thing. There's a more reliable calmness. It doesn't mean people don't have their ups and downs, but I would say
Of course.
Spiritism brings stability where there would probably be a lot, more variability. Yeah.
Exactly. And if we push to try to understand why Kardec says here, um, he says, okay, I will say that when well understood, Spiritism is actually a protection against insanity and suicide. So for you, Carol, when you read passages like this, and how do you feel Spiritism fosters the possibility of keeping us in greater balance?
It's wonderful that you bring specifically this passage because I had it highlighted right here, Vanessa,
In yellow.
in green and yellow.
Yellow, wow.
Because Kardec explains why, how it is fostered beautifully. He says that it is because when we embrace Spiritism truly, our understanding of our trials expand. We see trials as opportunities for moral growth and development, and so we treasure the blessings of progress. We understand by reading the Spirit's book itself that progress is a law. And we understand that God only allows for us to experience the so-called trials, that we have the tools to surpass and learn from. So instead of seeing trials as punishments, we change our living paradigm, as you said, and we start seeing them and feeling them, as Saul beautifully explained, as growth opportunities. So, Spiritism allows for us to develop a growth mindset. In today's educational research, you know, Vanessa, professionally, I come from an educational background. So there is a line of research nowadays in the field of education that embraces growth mindset, where we as educators are invited to guide and encourage learners to see their so-called mistakes as experimentations and opportunities for them to adjust their vision. Kardec is such a visionary that he already codified the growth mindset in the 19th century. So he is a very much avant-garde educator. And in Spiritism, we can use reason and faith to understand how life is a series of growth opportunities for us. So we no longer rebel, we accept. We no longer experience overwhelming sadness, we experience gratitude for the growth opportunity. This is why we become more mentally and emotionally balanced, because we change our living paradigm.
Oh, you're mute, Vanessa.
Right, Carol. And when we talk about it, Kardec, when he's discussing about the fact that as a neuroscientist, I think, my gosh, we didn't have much information, but he was so on point to say that the source of mental illness lies in pathological conditions of the brain. I was like, what? He already knew of it? Because back then, just so we know, in 1906, this is 1859. So in 1906, for the first time, a Spanish scientist named Ramon y Cajal with an Italian scientist named Camillo Golgi got the Nobel Prize for their discoveries of the cells. In the case of Ramon y Cajal, he had a very, very basic microscope, but he had such a visionary mind that he was able to draw the nervous system in ways that now, in the 21st century, when scientists with these powerful microscopes go back and research on it, they are mesmerized about how much he already knew. But that was 1906, and Kardec was already mentioning the foundation of our mental illnesses in terms of the physical body, of course, in the brain. That is quite striking. And so when he says that any person who is predisposed to insanity, to mental illness, will trigger it when we have this, he talks about the idée fixe. He uses the French, but it's like a fixed idea.
Sure.
When you read this, what came to your mind?
Yeah, I think if you're predisposed towards fixation of some description, then whatever you focus on, you're going to zero in on an aspect of that. So the Christian might fixate on the devil. They might say, I'm the devil, or I'm God, or I'm Jesus. And unfortunately, if he stands up and says, I'm God, somebody may stand up in the corner and says, no, I'm God, depending on where you are. I mean, it's not an uncommon fixation. And most psychiatrists will come across, a number of cases like that. So if you're going to have someone who is already, I mean, they use the word insane. We don't really use the word insane
No.
so much in these days. But, someone with severe, mental illness may well be obsessive over something. So if they were to be given the Spiritist literature, they may, just as with anything else put before them, fixate on the spirits, for example, and that would not be surprising based on mental illness, not on Spiritism. So it's not a reflection on Spiritism at all that some people, if they're going to come across it when they're unwell and not taking their medication, for example. I mean, these days we can treat most people very well with medication, but of course, it depends on whether that person is taking their medication or whether they're in touch with, their doctors. But by and large, Spiritism is emancipating, and will really be a preventive for suicide, and also obsessions may may happen for someone when they have a vacuum in their life. I mean, what is the structure and the ground from which health emerges? And then, well, the Spiritist tradition provides Spiritist centers, and those in turn provide support. And there's been a lot of studies in the last 10 years or so, showing that churches provide, a preventive to suicide, because they're providing that social structure, and Spiritism just the same. It's providing a good balanced place for people to exist within. So of course, if someone comes in and they're already unwell, then it might be something that they will obsess over. But ultimately, Spiritism offers part of really the structure of health, I would say, of good mental health and good energetic health.
Yeah. So thinking about this, it reminds us also of Andre Lewis, right? Because in his books, for example, Action, Reaction, and then Liberation, which talks so much about obsession, he talks about this fixed idea and how dangerous it is to allow ourselves to be in this single idea mindset, right, Carol?
Right,
Dangerous
Vanessa?
is that Kardec mentions here, and then we connect with Andre Lewis. It's important for people who are watching us to know of this, because we are merging into obsession, as Saul said, and it always starts with that fixation, that single idea. You want to talk more about this, Carol?
Of course. Thank you, Vanessa. In the book Liberation that you mentioned, which has been studied right here on Kardec Radio before, so if someone would like to watch the studies, they can, and of course, they can read the book on their own as well. In the book Liberation, we see that the spirit that is in greatest need, Gregorio, he suffers from this single idea. Though he discarnated, though he is in the spiritual realm, he is tortured by his desire for power. So we learn in the book Action and Reaction that all of us have a central theme, and that this central theme is recognizable to other spirits because it pulsates and vibrates within us, and it expresses our one of our strongest tendencies from our habits from the past. So in the case of Gregorio, that central theme was power. So, though he had discarnated, though he had been in the spiritual realm for centuries, he still André Louis described, portrayed himself as royalty, and he still believed that he had the power to quote unquote rule. And this is why he became the manager or director of a legion of obsessor spirits, because he had to rule. This impulse was still very strong in him, and it was through this fixed idea that he obsessed himself, trained others to also become obsessors, and maintained incarnate souls like ourselves under his control. So it is really important that we learn, as Kardec is saying here, what is our central theme, as you wrote, Vanessa? What is the desire that keeps coming back to us? And how do we identify it? According to Kardec in the Spirits book, we identify this by studying our own tendencies, and also by studying our thought patterns. Which thought keeps coming back and back and back to our minds 25 hours a day, so to speak? Is it we are not good enough? Is it I'm the best? What is it? We have to identify it to be able to learn what our central theme is, to then treat this fixed idea and thus begin liberating ourselves. But the beauty of understanding Spiritism is that we learn that we have the key. As we change ourselves, we free ourselves as well, because for centuries we had the tendency of thinking that if we were mentally ill, or if we were under obsession, it was someone else's fault. But in Spiritism, we learn that we are the ones responsible for our own choices.
I had a hard time turning on again my volume. So the choices you made. So now entering obsession, Saul Kardec mentions to us that there is a difference. We must not confuse pathological mental illness with obsession.
Sure.
And he's talking about obsession as the influence of malevolent spirits over people and creating a lot of problems for the person, to the
Hmm.
point that we may go, for example, I may go to a doctor's office, do a test, and if I'm under obsession, it may complicate the diagnosis, may complicate the treatment. I'm just giving an explanation, but it could be in any area of our lives, the complications of obsession. Of course, in this chapter, it doesn't talk about obsession in depth, but since he's talking about the topic of mental illness, suicide, and obsession, so he's saying, no, Spiritism does not produce mental illness unless you're predisposed. Then there is the case of this one guy at the time that they say here was famous and became acquainted with Spiritism, but he was not a very good example because he ended up in prison because he had schizophrenia. So the person who is saying it is mentioning about those who may use this communication with the spirits in ways and means that are not producing therapeutic results,
Sure.
right? And then what comes to your mind when he says this? Because I think nowadays people still need a warning not to play with these matters.
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you put money into the equation, then that can be corrupting. So Spiritism is about charity and using it for higher motives. I mean, if we look at Chico Xavier, would he have had the same reputation if he was doing it all for money? No, of course not, because he would not be seen as charitable. He would not be seen as a follower of Jesus Christ. He would just be seen as a very good businessman who earned a lot of money from his books, and that would be it. So we have as the motive as spiritists to help each other, and whether that's discarnate or incarnate. And if we consider there's many more spirits around the earth than there are, than the number of incarnates, there's always going to be a big job to do to bring balance to the earth, because, as you said, Vanessa, many different problems can be interrelated between the spiritual world and the physical world, between obsessors who want to wreak revenge on somebody whom they're targeting, and then they will go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, I can't see anything wrong. And because it may be so spiritual in origin that the instruments don't really pick it up, or it doesn't make sense because it hasn't got a physical origin. So we need to be working on both planes, on the spiritual and on the physical, with the best of the physical medication, and the best that 3D medicine can give. But Spiritism offers the 5D medicine, if you like, in respect of spiritist groups and mediums committed to work with charity, without money in the way, and trying to help the great need that is out there. And some people may say, well, why work with spirits when there's so many people all around you who need help? It's because everything's interrelated. That's why. And there's a lot more spirits around, and they are individuals just like, if I died today, I would still be worthy of help, just like either of you. So we must treat everybody as a brother or a sister, regardless of whether they have a physical body or not.
Yeah. Talking about that, memory is a big part of our lives. In Spiritism, at some point, studying it, we've come to know that we, even Andre Louis says, that it is the remembrance of past mistakes that may lead us to predisposition to illnesses. So memory is such a big deal in life. But when we reincarnate, we are given an opportunity to reset in terms of recalling the facts exactly. Though we may always go through a therapy and regress and go there, or even have spontaneous information, but overall, babies are born, new name, new body, new life, new everything. So, Carol, people then claim that this skeptic says to Kardec, how can we actually know what to do in this life if we don't remember previous lives?
It's actually a very good question. I agree with the skeptic in asking this question, because I would have asked it myself if I were studying, encountering Spiritism for the first time. So I think it's a very logical question, and Kardec answers the question in a very logical manner as well. He says, if we have learned a lesson well and are able to apply what we learn, does it really matter where we learned it, how we learned it, and who exactly taught us? Not necessarily. What matters is that we take that knowledge and multiply it however best we can and wherever we find ourselves. And secondly, being able to reset, as you have mentioned, Vanessa, we know is a sign of God's loving mercy. Because imagine if we could remember that a loved one of ours is either someone who we haven't learned to love yet, or someone whom we harmed. How would we feel? We would probably likely be stuck in relieving the trauma. And God is so wise that God tells each and every one of us out of pure love, I believe in you so much, and I invest so much in the good in you as my child, that I will allow you to blossom free of the shackles that you yourself have created. So God grants us all the resources to learn to love. So instead of remembering that we hurt a loved one, we are given the opportunity to start fresh, to reset, and to truly open our hearts to love. How much more therapeutic can reincarnation be? And as a matter of fact, Vanessa, you know this, in the mediumistic meetings in the Spiritist Society of Virginia, we often see the scarlet spirits begging to reincarnate because they know they will receive a respite from the trauma. So this is very advanced loving therapy on the part of our beloved Mother, Father God.
And he says, the remembrance of the past would greatly upset social relations and would be an obstacle to progress. But so we know on the same token that in the Spirit's book, when Kardec asked the spirits, how can we then have some direction for what to do in this life? And they replied like instinctive tendencies. So by natural abilities or conditionings or even vices that we have tips and hints about where we were in previous life, and that would be an indicative of previous lives experiences. And who doesn't experience that certainty at some point in their lives, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I because I've worked as a hypnotherapist, I've also worked with past life regression sometimes, not for sightseeing, but just if a presenting problem leads back there, and I've done this many times, so I know some of my past lives as well.
Yeah.
And like one time, I was living in France, and I was a bit dissolute. I had everything, but I went and gambled. And in this life, sometimes I've been tempted to gamble. I can see my mind very easily goes down that pathway. So I've really got to the stage where, I won't do the lottery. I won't really go there. But yeah, I think, it's those triggers. It's really like a trigger, like even in our own life, we may have a habit, we may overeat when we're stressed, and then we know we've dealt with it. But if we get really stressed, we may do the same thing, even though we know, that we don't need to do that anymore. So it's like something can trigger us back to, to behaving in a certain way. But I think we the most important lessons are ones we've incorporated. It's like they're basically unconscious competence. So I think that's what it means by, we don't need to know how we learned it. Do we need to remember the precise stages we went through when we learned to ride a bike? No, we just know when we get on the bike, can we ride the bike? And so that's really what's important about our past lives and the memories. It's important that we are proficient now. It doesn't really, we don't need to know all the stages that we've had to go to get to where we are now. And of course, from now we have many other stages to go. But of course, there would be, in the average person, there'd be many traumas that we've gone through, or many addictions, or many problem behaviors. So, we don't want to know everything, but it's useful to see what our tendencies are and to try and have a pattern interrupt, because often if we've got something very strong that we can put in the way of that, just reading a Kardec book or even a psychological book or something can be very useful.
Yeah, so let's explore more, since you said you professionally work on this. So it's so important to create positive memories nowadays, also to displace negative memories or to help them be rearranged. So when people come to you, for example, something in the present triggered in the past needs to be resolved or re-edited, let's say this way, right?
Sure.
It's as if we go to a movie editor and edit the way we want to express that message, or in our case, we want to feel it.
Sure.
Because it's mostly about how we see what happened and not so much what happened, because it's possible to go through tough
Definitely.
experiences.
Yeah.
What would you like to comment in that regard?
I think really, I mean, what I use more than anything else is something called timeline therapy. And the principle of that is just ask the client to go back to the root cause of whatever the presenting problem is, if it's an addiction or if it's, a problem in a relationship, whatever. And so they will go back to wherever it is. And if it goes to a past life, then I will do the work on that there. And really, I would say it's releasing the negative emotions is a key to emancipation. So it's like you said, it's the meaning we place on something, and even if they're going to that as something new, there will be a connection to their current problem, which when they're right in that moment, if it's in a past life, they may not immediately see the correlation. It's my job to say, can you see how that may have impacted the way you're relating to your husband, or your addiction back in the present? And oh yeah, I can see, because sometimes it's not immediately clear,
Yeah.
but it's disconnecting the negative emotions, which can be very deep and very profound. I mean, phobias can also come from a past life, and there can be very profound emotions involved. So once they detach from the negative emotions and yet keep the learning, because we're all learning from the negative experiences as well, from anything. And if you say to someone, preserve the positive from that experience, the positive learning, then they will do that. Even if someone might say, how can there be anything positive from this terrible thing? There always is. We're always learning. So when you consider that there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback, and that feedback is what we learn from it, what we learn in a positive sense in order to move forward. So I'd say that as spiritists, we're still learning. We have a huge boost in all this knowledge, but still we may sometimes say, I have all this knowledge and all this wisdom, and I still can't get everything right. Yeah, because we're learning. We're still going through that process, and we still have roots in the past, some of them very, even in this life and in many other lives, which we may not know. But there are still these roots of negative experiences or negative emotions. So the more we can release those from us, then we will be more available to the present.
And that's a journey for all of us who are watching it. But as Kardec mentioned, there is great power in not remembering. So don't go there just because that's all
No,
said, unless you have something that predisposes you like to a stagnation at the present moment, or some illness or etc., and you feel like you need to re-edit emotions. Sometimes it's not even the previous life, sometimes it's childhood as well,
Sure.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and as I said, I wouldn't, it's not even part of my training to just do a sightseeing, so I always tell people, sorry, I don't do that because it could be traumatic and it's a responsibility. So I only go there when that is the root cause of a serious problem that they want to deal with. And I'd
and you
suggest people
help
to do the same.
them to make sense of it.
Absolutely, yeah, because it would be very difficult if you suddenly saw your past life where you hurt somebody or you were very badly hurt. We have enough problems in one life of
Yeah,
people to forgive and people things to deal with. So it's only to help with something in this life that I would recommend it.
I agree. And as you said, when we remember our previous lives, I also remember some of them. For me, many of them is a reminder of what not to do again.
Sure.
And because usually we don't remember, I right? Isn't that true? You talk to all people who work in the field, it's like you don't actually go back and remember the happy moments because majority of them were there well aligned, but you are allowed to recall the things that are meaningful to the current puzzle of life. And
Yeah.
usually those are more challenging experiences, right?
Sure.
So it's a blessing not to remember. So if you need to remember, you need somebody like Saul, like very skillful and responsible. And sometimes it happens during a dream, right, Carol? It may happen during a dream.
Absolutely, it may happen during a dream. Only out of God's mercy, as you said, as you both have said, to help us heal at the present moment. Often we recall in dreams the answer to a puzzle that is keeping us stuck in the present. So God is so merciful that God allows the mentor spirits who have guided us and helped us to prepare ourselves for the current reincarnation, to take us to the spiritual realm, where we also have clinics, and guide us to remember, as Saul said, the root cause of an issue, so that we see God's loving justice. God does not apply the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. God only allows us to redress the choices that we have made so
Mhm.
that we learn from them, right? So that we free ourselves and so that we have an opportunity to love others. In the book Laws of Life, right, Vanessa, that you have studied here, Emmanuel explains the law of cause and effect brilliantly. He says to us in a question and answer format, much like this book, What is Spiritism? He explains, if we find ourselves in the present with tyrannical parents, it is because in the past they were the children we did not guide lovingly. Then he says as well, if you find yourself with a rebellious wife at the present time, it is because in the past you yourself chose to push her onto the abyss. Then he goes further. He doesn't stop there. Emmanuel doesn't sugarcoat it. He says, if you have an unfaithful husband, it is because you yourself have taught him how to behave in this particular way in the past. So we see that God allows for us to encounter those brothers and sisters of ours again in a new configuration, and we feel triggered, as Saul has said, because we have responsibility. So God allows for us to revisit exactly that turning point and reconstruct, rebuild that relationship in love, with love, and for love. But not the love that is passing, rather, the love that is eternal from spirit to spirit. And only one, reincarnation explains this. And two, only reincarnation allows for us to redress our own past choices. So sometimes we remember in dreams the key to that, to solving that puzzle, so we can act on it
Yes.
and free ourselves and others.
Right. So, talking about this, the blessing of knowing the past or the blessing of not remembering, it may vary, as Kardec says, free from the memory of a troublesome past. You act with more freedom. It is a new beginning for you. Your old debts are paid, and it's up to you not to incur new ones. Okay. And you know, I often tell people, if you want to know a little bit about who you are, because self knowledge, as Saltwater said at the beginning, is so important. It, go to Netflix, right?
Sorry
You know,
for laughing.
yeah,
Right, I'm laughing.
yeah,
Yes, 'cause we recognize ourselves there.
right.
Yes.
And you go there, watch a program, and see, especially historical ones, and ask yourself, who would I potentially be there? Who was I? I'll give an example. Since Sol is in London,
Mhm.
the series Bridgerton. It's so interesting. As I was
Mhm.
reading on what Dr. Bezerra de Menezes' book through the medium Yvonne Perena, a book that is yet to be translated in English, Dramas of Obsession. Uh, it's so interesting because it happens in that same time, 1800s, and then you watch the Bridgerton, and you realize how society was at the time, of course, mostly in England, in Europe. And then we get to know the different roles, how usually society came about. You read the history books, like even by Chico Xavier, Emmanuel's novels, it matches completely, and we see the same dynamics, the social dynamics, and the potential behaviors that we had, the attitude in life. And then 3 centuries later, we are here in a
Mhm.
different setting, different name, different roles, and yet potentially repeating the same social interactions. Marrying out of conveniences. I see many people nowadays who have a hard time choosing. Why? Because they spend so many lives being chosen because
Mhm.
of arranged marriages that probably this is the first life people are learning to choose their loved ones, that they are
Mhm.
allowed to choose. And when they had children, like traumatic experiences for women at birth due to
Mhm.
lack of medical care, prenatal care, or difficult experiences for others because, like, women tricked men into marriages out of wedlock, etc. So in those we can see who we were and recognize today the same tendencies that we can change. As Kardec said, it's up to you not to incur in new debts or problems. That decision, Saul, is not easy to recognize or to make, is it?
Definitely. And I think, you know, sometimes it's almost fair to say the problem is with everybody else, not with me, because we all feel that, right? If it was just me being a spiritist, tripping through the daisies, everything would be fine. But there's a lot of people out there who want to trip us up. And, so we have to factor that in. It's not just knowing, what's right and knowing the path we want to go and knowing the good path. It's realizing that there will be temptations. There will be people trying to distract us. There will be tragedies. There'll be someone dying in our life inevitably. And all these things can knock us off kilter. I mean, in a past life, my child died, when I lived in a previous life. And that made me turn my back on God. So we have to be so resilient that anything that we value highly, if it were taken away, we could still put God, central in our life. And that's why the Bible says, God first type thing, because without that, we don't really make sense of tragedy. And the only way we can steer clear of tragedy, and tragedy often leads to madness and suicide and stuff, is to really say there is a plan, everything connects, and it's not God being cruel or life being vicious to you. Everything will sort itself out in time. You just have to hold to the justice of God and the goodness of God.
Love it. So Saul brought us back, right, Kara, to the very
Right.
beginning of Spiritism. And that's what Spiritism is all about. It begins with God.
Yes.
And that's why my car in the US, the tag is
Mm-hmm.
In God We Trust, Kardec. So my husband asked me, aren't you worried that wherever you go, people know that you'll be there? And I said, I don't care. As long as they see Kardec and God, I'm fine. It's not
Very
about me,
good.
it's about God and Kardec. Right?
Absolutely. You're right.
So
Yeah.
it's such a joy, so liberating. It's so fortifying for us to have this conversation and know of this new direction. That we hope that those who are watching us have an opportunity to pick up this book, What Spiritism, and sit down with Kardec, have some tea or coffee with Kardec, and allow him to delight your mind. Carol, as we wrap up the program today, we're very thankful to you. Would you like to say your final comment just for today?
Uh, Infinite gratitude to Kardec for talking to us. As I was reading the book, I felt in my heart as if we were having a class with Kardec and he were teaching us specifically, and it feels so wonderful to be immersed in the vibration of such a brilliant mind. As Leon Denis reminds us lovingly in the book After Death, when we read an inspirational book like this that brings us the light of the truth, we elevate our frequency, our thought frequency, to the level of that particular author. So as we pick up this book, and we are so fortunate that we can have the book within the click of a button, um, we actually commune with Kardec. We are invited to be in the same, or not the same, but closer thought frequency to his. And it's so delightful to be immersed in these ideas. And Kardec has such an ease with words that it feels like poetry, like as if the ideas were brought to life before our eyes. And it's so nourishing. And as you said, it reaffirms the new living paradigm that all of us who are here have reincarnated to embrace.
Yes.
So it is an honor and a privilege to commune with Kardec.
Thank you, Kara. We agree with you. What about you, Saul? What would you like to say to wrap up?
Yeah, I just think all Kardec's books are a real privilege to read. And if somebody has stumbled upon this and wonders what all the fuss is about, I really recommend reading this book and reading all of his books, you know, his other 5 main books. And when you got the time after that, the supplemental, you know, the news, whatever it's called, you know, newsletter, whatever, you know, all of that is very interesting. He was truly a luminary in 2 dimensions, you know, in the 3D with the sciences and all his knowledge and his abilities as an educator, but also in the 5D, because surely when he crossed over, there were many people very grateful for what he had achieved. So I think he continues to be, you know, profoundly influential, and you know, that's what all of us can aspire to do as spiritists, just in disseminating and talking about his wisdom, because that also helps. So it's wonderful that you have given us this opportunity, Vanessa, and really grateful.
Thank you. I want to thank Carol and Saul for this moment, and all the friends who are here, Abshare, Slavic, Saul, everyone who was able to watch us also on Instagram, Linda Walker, Vivi Marzuco, Stella Ferreira, Miriam Aquanta, Aline, Aldenice, Karina Alice, many other people. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being with you. We look forward to having you join us at another What Spiritism program in this conversation with Kardec, and thus bringing new life for all of us. So thank you, Carol. Thank you, Saul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa and Saul, for our togetherness in the good.
Thank you, friends. We wish you a beautiful day and night in God's love. And stay tuned to Kardec Radio, because here there's always more to nourish our souls. Thank you, friends.
God bless. Thank you.
All right.